Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darian Scott. I'm the Director of Economic Inclusion for the Chattanooga Area Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank the Southside Council for having this discussion with us today. It's actually a continuation from the DIVERSIFY 2020 Summit. It was a very good, intense conversation, and the Southside Council wanted to go ahead and continue this conversation. That way more people can get involved and getting their input in. So without further ado, we have a great panel lined up for today. I have three people, leaders that I call them in the Chattanooga area. One is Debra, Socia, CEO of the Enterprise Center. The next would be James McKissic, President of Arts Build. And the third would be Dionne Jenkins, Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union, TVFCU. I'm gonna let you three guys go. I'm gonna go around the table. You talk about a little bit first about what you do in your role at your job, and then we'll come back with all the questions. And Dionne, I'll start with you.
Great. So as Darian stated, I'm Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for TVFCU. So basically what I do in my role is community engagement, recruitment, and retention. One of the things that many don't know about TVFCU is through our Diversity and Inclusion program, we do offer free training to small businesses that don't have a D&I officer on site. So if you want somebody to come in and train your staff or your executive team, that is something that we do offer, but also want to make sure that we're reaching out to our youth and helping them understand that they could have a career at a financial institution. So educating on what we offer as a credit union is also something that I do.
Wow, Dionne, that's some good stuff right there. Remind me to dig into that more with you later on. James, go ahead.
All right, well, hi everybody, I'm James McKissic and I'm the president of Arts Build. Arts Build is a local organization and our mission is building community through the arts. So we're excited to be part of this community today. To learn more about Arts Build, you can visit our website at artsbuild.com. We're an advocacy organization. We fund 23 arts organizations throughout the city, fund lots of different arts and culture related projects in Chattanooga and Hamilton County. And with D&I work, we also have begun to offer racial equity consulting to the organizations that we serve.
Thank you, James, thank you. And Deb, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Deb, and I'm the president of the Enterprise Center, which is a nonprofit. And we work in 3 different areas. What we're probably best known for is our Tech Goes Home program that works with families, children, adults, seniors who need technology and access at home and training to use that technology well. If you're interested in it, you can go to techgoeshomecha.org and you can learn a lot more about it. The second program we work on is the Innovation District. So we program events and run projects. We support diversifying the ecosystem. In fact, we have a workshop coming up. I'm gonna drop a link to everyone called Change Catalyst. I can't get it to go. I'll figure out how to get it to you all, but called Change Catalyst that helps people who are supporting innovators and creators to diversify that ecosystem. So we work on that. And the third piece we work on is the Chattanooga Smart Community Collaborative, and we work on identifying with the community problems they wish to solve and think about what are the technological interventions we can use to help solve those problems.
Wow, wow. A lot of good stuff going on at the Enterprise Center. So I just want to say to everyone that's joining us, viewers via Zoom, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A. We do have someone moderating those questions, but we're gonna go ahead and jump into the thick of things. So I want all 3 of you guys to answer this question, and I know it may be similar in some points because it was a good event, so some people may like something more than others, but what was most impactful about DIVERSIFY 2020, and why do you feel that piece was most impactful? And James, I'll start with you.
Well, I really enjoyed the opening session with Dr. Linda Wiley, who's one of my favorite people and who's someone who's consulted and counseled me before too. And one thing that she talked about that really stood out for me was as organizations, businesses, and institutions that we have to really be thinking about COVID-19 and safety precautions, but we also have to think about how it's disproportionately impacting different communities and how we look through that lens with the work that we do. So that kind of stood out for me and made me think a little bit more about how does that apply to the arts and the arts community here in Chattanooga.
Wow, good, good. I'm gonna get more with you on your sector in the arts just here in a minute. Deb, tell me what was most impactful to you about it?
I thought it was a great conference. And I'm a bit of a data nerd. I will admit to being that. And I really enjoyed the data and the presentation of such a wide array of data and how that data presented a story. You cannot look at that data and not recognize and be aware of the systemic racism that has led to these outcomes. And the data was really impactful and powerful, I thought.
Yeah, it was, I know Dr. Pastor has some very effective slides. So with that being said, Dionne, I definitely I know you were my moderator for the very in-detail discussion for DIVERSIFY. So definitely tell me what you thought was most impactful.
Mm-hmm. I think the part that was most impactful for me was when Ron Harris talked about how African Americans in Chattanooga struggle with getting positions here locally, that when we're looking for talent, oftentimes we go outside of our own city to find that. And I moved here from Atlanta, and very early on in my career, I had a manager tell me that when you're applying for a job, you should be able to do 80% of the job with a 20% stretch, because that's where you grow. And what I've noticed in Chattanooga when I'm involved in recruiting efforts for different organizations, African Americans in Chattanooga have to have 100% of the qualifications in order for them to be considered for the job. There is no stretch. And so in my education of diversity and inclusion and recruitment, I want business owners and HR managers to understand that they are putting undue burden on these applicants by saying they have to do the job at 100%. So that was the piece that stood out for me most with DIVERSIFY.
And I totally agree. I can totally understand that point. So we have an understanding of what we thought was impactful. Did we think anything was missing? I know I got my own things I wish we could have added in a little more, and I plan to add them next year. But Deb, I'm gonna start with you on this one. Do you think anything was missing, or what more could we have done to spice it up a little more?
When you have an event on Zoom, it's pretty hard. It changes the whole dynamic, but I love the stories. So I may be a data nerd, but I love the stories too. And to me, that data wins your mind, those stories win your heart. And I always like to say, you got to have both to win the day, right? And so I love having both of those. And I heard some stories, but I wouldn't have minded hearing more. I think that they're very convincing and they help you take that data and make meaning of it.
Good point. I like that, Deb. Good point. Jane, what more could it have been for you? Was it missing anything?
Well, I thought overall it was a great event, and kudos to you and the chamber for pulling that off. The only thing that I missed was the good lunch that y'all usually have. So if you can figure out how to send that to us digitally, then you'll get 100% from it.
Good one. Dionne, real quick, because before I get into the thick questions, anything we could have added more?
When you're talking about D&I, there's always so much that you can talk about that we could have talked 8 hours and still miss something. What I think the DIVERSIFY conference did is it sparked conversations that are continuing to happen. So while I think we may have missed something potentially, we still have opportunity to continue the dialogue. So.
And that's the goal, and that's why we record them, that's why we post them, that's why we're keeping the word going. Okay, so real quick, let's talk about COVID-19. That's part of the conversation we had to continue. I'm just gonna pick a few of you guys. Now, I can't let everybody answer all the questions by time-wise, but Dionne, tell us a little bit about how was your sector affected by COVID-19, or was it affected? I know it was banking, so how did that look for you guys? How did you pivot? What did you have to do?
Well, fortunately for us, we have the ability for our members to bank online, by phone, through video. So while we closed our lobbies to direct member interaction and traffic, we did not lose any business by offering the services through our virtual teller machines, our ITMs, through online banking, through phone in, through our call center. So business-wise, our members did not feel a gap. You know, everyone wants that face-to-face, but we were able to pivot very quickly and offer other options, and we still offer that. So fortunately for us, we have not had to shut down due to COVID.
Awesome. Deb, what about the enterprise center? How did the COVID affect you all?
Well, you know, Tech Goes Home is really all about relationships and networking and building opportunities to work together. And it's pretty hard to teach somebody how to get online if they've never been online before. And the only way you can do it is online, right? And so our team came up with a totally new approach of Tech Goes Home online, and we've done a lot of work in creating new ways of managing that. We had a Tech Goes Home for folks who are working from home to help them improve their efficiency. We had Tech Goes Home for teachers, which we had about 150 teachers run through, that helps you learn how to use technology to better teach, right? We had a Tech Goes Home Basics that we ran and modeled, and we're learning a lot. We have a Tech Goes Home coming up with James and Arts Build for creatives. Just who are the folks who are really impacted by COVID? How do we provide them with new resources? We also worked with a lot of folks in the small business community, in the faith-based community, the restaurant community, to pivot their work so that they could provide services online. So pastors could give their sermons and collect tithes, so that restaurants could communicate with their constituents what they were serving and how they were serving it, and was it curbside? I mean, these are all difficult things if you're not a technologist. And so we have great volunteers here in the community that helped with all of that. One of the other things we're working on is, there'll be an announcement soon, but we're going to get some more air quality sensors. Where are the problems with particulates in the air? How is that impacting outcomes for people who get COVID? We know who's getting impacted the most. Are those areas of the community more concerning with regard to air quality? And if so, what are we doing about it? So there's a variety of ways we can do that sort of support. And we are doing an online ecosystem tour coming up, which the whole point of that is to really broaden for the community the opportunity to learn about the resources available to entrepreneurs. In a time where the job market is pretty difficult, a lot of entrepreneurial activity begins. How do we make sure those folks have access to the resources? Because there are a lot of them here in Chattanooga. And so we'll be doing an online innovation ecosystem tour in the upcoming weeks as well.
That's kind of the direction I was going down, Deb. I know you mentioned kind of getting resources out into the community. Is it difficult getting resources out to lower income communities, and how do you go about that?
It's interesting. You know, we aren't the folks that have the trust in the community. I think people know us and trust us, but not everybody would know who we were or what we're about. We actually rely on the trusted leaders within those communities, and we get a little trust by proxy. So we work with the faith-based folks, we work with the schools or the libraries or the community centers or folks like James and Arts Build. And we work through those organizations, and they teach the course. We provide the resources, the hardware, and the curriculum. So it's really about finding pathways to trusted individuals in the neighborhoods and using that as a way to provide services through folks who are already there, already trusted, already known.
Gotcha. So we all know DIVERSIFY took a big turn, and we talked about a lot of issues. Some of them racial systemic issues. James, in your sector of work, what are some things you would like to see happen, or what are some things affecting your sector of work that we may be able to touch on to kind of tighten up in Chattanooga?
Well, I know you referenced COVID and how it's impacted our sector. And I think the art sector is in a very interesting position because when COVID hit and everything began to shut down, the arts was very harshly impacted by that. But on the flip side, the arts is what everyone kind of leaned into to be able to survive, you know, the isolation, the time at home. And I see that there are 113 people on this call, and I know that all 113 of them have listened to music while they've been working from home. I know that they've watched movies, read books, looked at paintings. If they didn't have any paintings or artwork on their walls, I bet they wish that they could go out and get some because staring at blank walls is not fun. But the art sector was hit really hard, and financially at this point, we're looking at just locally in Hamilton County about a $3 million negative impact to that sector. People have been furloughed and laid off in the arts. If you can't be open, you know, you can't have performances or can't do live music. You can't be close to each other in a gallery, and you know, can't go in and purchase things. But what I have seen in our sector is people being really creative and resilient. They've pivoted to doing their work online, performing online, monetizing that, selling artwork online. We recently bought a painting, and the entire process took place online. So people have been really resilient. They've leaned in. They're doing incredible work, still making sure that the arts are being spread out into the communities in Hamilton County. And that really is inspiring to me and what keeps me going every day.
Wow, wow, wow. So let me ask you guys about inclusion in your sector. Dionne, I'm gonna start with you. What does inclusion look like in your sector? And are there some things that you think the industry could be doing right now to encourage a more of a positive movement with inclusion?
In financial services, we do find it difficult to find people of color for employment. Oftentimes you hear people say that I can't find the right candidate. And for us, it's helping them understand that to work in financial services, you don't have to have a degree in accounting or finance. We're looking for attorneys, for those specializing in marketing and human resources and IT. So expanding what people are looking at when they look for jobs and saying we can meet that need and offer that. In terms of inclusion financially, one of the things that we do, we offer financial literacy, especially in schools. We find that it's important to work with the students when they're younger to help them manage those finances so that when they are of age and looking for loans and opening accounts, that they have the credit to do so. So providing that education is important for us, but also just diversifying where we show our support in the community. You know, it's important that we have a branch on the bus line so those without transportation can at least take a bus and get to the credit union if they need to, if they're unable to do it online or don't have a car. So inclusion for us is just, it's 100%. It's a wraparound that we look at it in every aspect of what we do at the credit union.
Thank you, Dionne. Thank you. You know, I love working with you and Tommy and Marcus and everybody over there at TVFC. Y'all my people. James, why is inclusion important in the arts? And what are some outlets that people can maybe get involved with to support that inclusion?
Well, I think inclusion is incredibly important in the arts. I mean, the arts is how we express our humanity. So if any of us are left out of that, then that's a problem. I think for many years, the arts sector has focused on diversity, which is different from inclusion. So we have begun to see lots more exhibits and performances that represent diverse cultures and diverse backgrounds. But when it comes to inclusion, what we still are struggling to see is more diversity in leadership roles, power sharing, decision-making, boards and administration, and arts organizations. or organizations. So that is one of the things that, we've been really thinking through and working and partnering with organizations on. COVID has kind of posed a challenge for some of the things that we had set out to do this year. But one thing that we have done is we've engaged a consultant to work with some of our organizations one-on-one about racial equity issues that they might be facing. And that could involve staff training, board training, consultations, answering questions, even looking at physical space and how that might pose a barrier, or marketing materials and what are they really communicating. So we've been working with that. We've also set a goal to help work with organizations to bring more inclusion and diversity to their boards. And also to be a resource when people are looking to really reach out and broaden their networks when it comes to recruitment for staff as well.
That board situation is very important. So let me ask you guys this. So I work with you all pretty often, right? So in a city like Chattanooga, we often work together. What are some ways we could be more intentional about making sure we breaking some of those systemic cycles that we see? Debra, I'll start with you.
I'll say I learn a lot from you all, and I will thank James because our organization came up with a set of commitments about what we as an organization will do, and we really modeled it on the work that you did at ArtsBuild, and I thank you for that. I think it's a difficult time for us to figure out next steps, I think, for organizations. But the one thing that happens in Chattanooga is one of the reasons I love being here. I've been here a year now, is that I know I can make a phone call and some other people will jump in and help. So I'll give you an example. We're working with the Chamber on workforce development, right? Really trying to think about how are we helping people find jobs that pay a living wage and give you insurance, right? How do you move into that job when you have to work 2 or 3 part-time jobs in order to pay the bills? How do you make change? And so we actually have about 40 organizations that are all helping us think about this, that are all making commitments for what they can offer to help with that process. And so we're working from the business side and we're working from the community side, and it's really pretty powerful. I don't find that happening in very many communities. I think if we're going to break some of the cycles that exist, we have to think big. It may take a lot of small steps to get there, but we gotta have a big goal. And so I feel like this is a really good time for us to be thinking big and for us to invite in as many people as possible to be part of that conversation. And one of the communities that I always like to include is the faith-based community, in part because of what we talked about earlier, which is they have a lot of trust in the community and they're already providing a lot of resources. So we have faith-based folks, we have nonprofits, we've got anchor institutions. I mean, it's just amazing the number of people willing to step up. I think that changes the end result when you can get that many people talking about the same thing and looking for solutions.
I agree. I definitely agree, Deb. What about you, Dionne? Is there anything specific you think that we all can do as we work together intentionally to break some of these systemic cycles?
Absolutely. Darian, you and we sit on a lot of committees together and do a lot of work together. And, one of the things that we notice is oftentimes the people in charge or running the meeting don't look like us. And they want to diversify and they want to be inclusive, but we challenge them to look at their own staff. Who do you have in your organization that's doing this for you internally? And so making sure that we ask those tough questions when needed, but also making sure that we bring the right people to the table and not having the same voices at the table all the time. We need fresh voices, we need fresh perspectives. So when we meet new people, we say, hey, you need to be a part of this organization, or you need to be added to this event or this meeting, because we have to keep it fresh and going. When things get stale, that's when you lose, right? So being innovative and having new ideas and new people at the table are really ways that we can help break that systemic cycle.
Wow, good stuff, good stuff. James, I really, I gotta let you weigh in on this. So I'm just gonna recap the question. All of us work together often. What are some ways we could be intentional about breaking some of these systemic cycles we see?
Well, I always remind people that, like you just said, these are systems and structures. This has taken 400 years to get us to this place. So it is not something that's going to be solved overnight, in a week, in a year. What I always like to do in my arena and in my area of responsibility is just to commit to making progress. And the things that I have influence over, the partnerships that I can build, make sure that I'm opening doors for people, that I'm asking questions, calling out and pointing out things that I think are inequitable, and that should be addressed. I think that, there's a lot of energy around racial equity right now. There are lots of great things happening. People are learning things. And I want to see that maintained and continued. But I also know that our attention levels go in cycles. And something else might happen in a few weeks, and then we'll all be on to that other new thing. So this is a commitment, and as I look out my window right now, I see a flag at half-staff, and I'm pretty sure that that is in honor of Congressman John Lewis. And I think that his life is an example of the time and the energy and the commitment it takes, that he spent a lifetime working on these issues, was physically beaten, mentally and verbally attacked, even up to the last few months of his life. And he will not see complete freedom or the dream that he was working for. And we might not either, but we can take the steps, we can work in our arenas, in our areas of influence, and we can open doors for people.
Thank you, James. I say that a lot. We may not see it, our grandkids may not see it, but as long as we get that ball rolling, that's what's important, getting the ball rolling. So back to Diversify real quick. So during Diversify, Dionne said something that was shocking to a lot of people, not really so shocking to me, but I want to kind of bring that back up. So during Diversify, Dionne, you spoke on why you named your kids their names. Could you kind of recap that? And James and Deb, I want y'all kind of to weigh in after she speaks. Go ahead, Dionne.
So what I shared in Diversify was based off of some of the information that the keynote talked about, but it's in naming your children. And so for my daughter, her name is Marquise, and that is not a common name. Some people would call that a ghetto or a hood name, but I was very intentional about giving her a middle name that if we found she was finding struggles based on her name and being discriminated against, she could easily switch to her middle name and it would open doors that may have been closed before. But for my son, knowing that he would be a Black man in America, I named him Justin O'Neill. I mean, that it doesn't get any more just commonplace than Justin O'Neill. And on a resume, you would have to dig deep to find out who he is, but you wouldn't know what he looked like based off of his name. And I knew that there would be challenges and barriers for him already being a Black man in America. So his name was not one that I wanted to create from birth. And that is very commonplace in the Black community. We talk about names and how it can close doors. When I named my daughter Marquise, my mother was very upset. And at birth, when she found out the name, she said, well, she'll never get a job just based off of that name, because she knew what those barriers were. So I had no idea that there would be so much input after Diversify from me just stating something that was just very commonplace and normal for me in my community.
Deb, I want you to weigh in a little bit on that, then James will pass it to you also. Go ahead, Deb.
Having worked in schools for a good part of my life, predominantly Black and Latino schools, I've heard that story before, but I've also read the research, right? We have 2 resumes that are identical, one with the name that sounds Black and one that with a name that sounds white. The two identical resumes, the person with the white sounding name gets the job, gets an interview. And so for me, that is shocking, right? It's horrible to me that we, in our society, it actually what it is heartbreaking for me. That any mama has to make a decision to name their child based on how society might judge them breaks my heart. And as a white lady, I never had to worry about that, right? It would not have occurred to me when my children were born that I needed to worry about their name because it might influence how somebody views them. So, you know, that it's so sad to me. And we need to figure this out, right? We just need to figure this out. Because for me, your son has a beautiful name, but you should have had the option to choose to name him whatever name was in your heart.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you. Go ahead, James.
Well, I guess with a name like James McKissic, I've always benefited from them just expecting me to show up in a kilt somewhere. But I do have a friend from graduate school who her name was Tanisha Ann Rayford. And I remember when we finished NYU's master's program and started to look for jobs, and she sent out resumes and used her first name and last name, and was not getting any callbacks. But then when she used her middle name and became Ann Rayford, the exact same hospitals reached back and set up interviews with her. So this is real. So I mean, I can't debate it or say, you know, that it's not. This is a thing that's documented by data and by personal experiences. And I love Dionne for sharing that story and helping other people understand it.
Thank you, thank you. So I guess one of the main questions is, what does forward steps look like? Like we hear the situations about the names. You know, that's one of the things we're gonna have a hard time dealing with, because that's like somebody seeing the names and choosing. But like, how can we start to get that ball rolling effectively in our community? So anybody want to take that? What does forward steps look like?
Well, I think you've talked to three people who've kind of shown you what forward steps look like in the arenas where they work. I mean, Dionne is talking about what she's doing and offering D&I training to small businesses. You know, I'm doing what I can do in the arts sector. Deb is doing what she is able to do with digital inclusion. I mean, you sit in your space and take time and think and meditate on what you can do. And, you know, if it is that you notice that you're never seeing resumes get to your level with creative names, then there's a problem somewhere down the line that you need to address. You know, if you sit in your cafeteria at work and look around and everybody looks like you, there's a problem. And you need to explore it and think about it and, you know, kind of dig deeper, see what's going on. These are not complicated things. The evidence is all around us. The question is, are we going to open our eyes to it? Are we going to acknowledge that these are real problems? And are we going to decide to do anything about it?
You're absolutely right, James. You're absolutely right. Go, you can say something, Dionne, go ahead.
One thing I want to make sure that we do is, oftentimes we're limited in the power that we have, right? So I serve as vice president, so that limits the power that I have, but my CEO has to be engaged and on board in order to make true change, because coming from me, it sounds great. Yeah, oh, sure, we should do it. But coming from him, it needs to happen. So making sure that we engage people of power and get them on board to understand why it's important to have diversity, why it's important to be inclusive, and for them to utilize their voice and their power in that fight, because we're not going to be able to do it by ourselves if those in power are still fighting and saying, nope, that's not what I want. So getting those in power, getting people who are in place to make the decisions to understand that relevance is really how we're going to move the needle forward in any capacity.
Yes, yes. Speaking truth to power, it's a must. It's a must to move the needle. Go ahead, Deb.
I was going to respond to something Dionne said earlier too, that a lot of folks in power look like me, right? And so, and particularly in the nonprofit sector, there are a lot of white women in power. And I read an article about 6 months ago about the problems of white women leading nonprofits. And I think part of this is folks who look like me stepping up and learning, right? And reading as much as you can read and learning as much as you can learn. And, you know, how to be an anti-racist. And Kindi's book, he says, you are either a racist or an anti-racist, because you can't be not a racist if you are not an anti-racist, because you are continuing to contribute to the power system that created this problem in the first place, right? So trying to, you know, I'm never going to understand the experience of folks who look like you. I lived a different life. I'm a white lady. But I have to be able to step away and understand how that power structure got created, how it gets maintained, and what things I can do to dismantle some of that, right? And that's, I think it's important to recognize that when the person in power is a white person, we need to do what you said, Dionne, right? We need to step up and we need to say, here are some steps you can take to help dismantle those systems that have led us to this place.
Awesome, 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 awesome. Real quick, we have not discussed, oh, you know what? We haven't discussed schools, but I'll get to that in a minute. But let's discuss some of these rehires. As the city opens back up, as communities open back up, you know, COVID numbers, they've been spiking in areas, you know, Tennessee, one of the states, you know, our numbers been going up. But as we people go back to work and as more jobs obviously become available, I see new jobs posted all the time. How do we look at the balance of unemployment demographically? How do we look at that? What I'm afraid of, I'm afraid that African Americans keep a high unemployment rate. I'm afraid of that, honestly. I'm afraid of that. And why everybody else's unemployment rate shrinks. What are some things that we could look at, that we can put in the community, that people we can hold accountable to maybe help keep that balance? James, I'll start with you if you can think of anything.
Well, I would just, you know, I'm just thinking about what you said, and you know, the African American employment rate is usually double the rate for everyone else. So I would expect that everything that has happened with COVID, the layoffs, the unemployment, of course, will hit Black people and other people of color much harder, and hit disadvantaged communities much harder as well. I would say that, you know, what things can you put in place? I think this is a time, if you can, to really use technology and you know, maybe offer training. I'm thinking of what we're doing, you know. So artists have been really affected by the closes, the shutdowns, the chances to get their products, their services, the things that they do before the public. So Tech Goes Home is a great partnership for us to help people begin to move that into the digital space, to offer it online, to finally create the website that, you know, they've been thinking about creating for a couple of years, to do the photographs that they need to be able to sell their artwork, to figure out how to stream concerts or shows and take tips or take admissions and sell tickets to those. So those are things that we're doing. I also like to remind people, you know, that the arts is an employer in our city. It supports about 6,500 full-time jobs. And that's from people who work in the arts to the servers at restaurants who are working when people come from the CSO or go to the opera and, you know, have dinner beforehand. So the arts is a huge economic driver. And with our sector being hit the way that it has, we are going to have to recover from that. So that is a challenge and a concern.
Darian, I wanted to respond to that question. For me personally, it's about making sure people have access to information. So if you follow me on Facebook, you know, anytime I'm aware of a job opening, I post it on my Facebook page.
You do.
I want that information to get out, because if people are looking, they may not know where to look, or they may not know where the opportunities lie. So making sure that I let my friends and my network know, here are positions that are open. These are people that are hiring. And if it's someone that I know personally and I know they're looking, I will inbox them and say, hey, this would be the perfect fit for you. But also, I'm willing to step out on a limb and go to that employer and say, I know of these individuals that have the skill set that you're looking for, and try to make that connection as well. So that's just making sure people have access to the information and knowing where these jobs are and what the skills are needed to get them hired.
You're absolutely right. Great information. Deb, you want to weigh in on that also?
Real quick, I'd just say accountability too, right? Like transparency and accountability. Let's keep track of who's getting rehired and who's not. And let's be really honest about that. And let's make it, you know, let's make that data available. Let's look at that data and talk about why this is so, and address it, because we can't fix what we're not talking about.
Absolutely. I totally agree. You know, I couldn't let y'all go without asking about how y'all feel about schools reopening. I mean, so I'm gonna let you guys go around. What's they did?
I'm sorry. That was my computer beeping. You know, for me, that's a really hard one, because I was a teacher and a principal for so long. And honestly, I don't think there's a right answer here. I just don't think there's a right answer.
It's different.
What isn't okay with me is the fact that a lot of the learning is happening outside of school. And we have a lot of children without the tools they need to access that learning. And that, you know, Hamilton County has done a great job of trying to keep track of all the kids, but it's just not been possible. And so we've lost some kids through this. And, you know, their current plan is probably the best plan that's possible under the circumstance, but we got parents who got to work. We got kids who don't have access at home. We have children who may not be supervised at home because their parents have to work, or, you know, there's so much complexity here that I don't think there's a great win. I think the one thing that we can focus some energy on as a community is getting every kid connected at home, right? Get them a device, make sure they know how to use it, make sure the parents or the guardians know how to use the parent portal so they can keep on top of things. Make sure they have a decent computer. You know, we got to make sure those things are in place. That's sort of a basic requirement across the board for me.
I totally understand, and you're absolutely right. We need all of them to get a device. I was speaking to a mom a couple of days ago, and she was just saying she works from home right now because of COVID, and she has 3 daughters, and it's like they 8, 12, and 15, I think, and it's like, how is she gonna teach and work? And she had to be on her computer, and man, definitely something to think about. Dionne, you want to weigh in on that? I'm going back to school.
Yeah. So I have one entering 9th grade, first year of high school. He's been at the same school from K through 8. So he wants to go back into the classroom. Unfortunately, I'm not comfortable with him going to the classroom. So we had to have some tough decisions, and he'll stay home because, one, he is a student that doesn't need that hand holding or that extra tutoring. He can work just fine independently. But also, as you look at the numbers, for parents who have to work and who have to send their kids to school, if I have the ability to keep my kid out to give another parent space so that they would feel more comfortable that the numbers are low, that's what we chose to do. And I know many parents have looked at it in that regard. But it's tough. It's tough. I know when the kids first went home, there was an initiative where they were raising money to provide devices for students in Hamilton County. And as an organization, TVFCU donated toward that fund to help get devices to every student. But I think as a community, more businesses need to step up, and we need to make sure that every child has access to a device and that children don't have to share, because Darian, in that regard that you're talking about, an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old, they shouldn't have to share a device. they're doing different work. You know, they need their own device. And that's something that I think we can continue to push with the organizations and making sure that our students have that.
Thank you, Dionne. Thank you. James, I'm gonna let you weigh in on that. Then I'm gonna go to the Serena in the chat, see if she got any questions. Go ahead, James.
Well, my heart really goes out to families as they make that decision. And I know that people are going to do the best they can with the information that they have. One thing that we have focused on here at ArtsBuild is making sure that no matter what platform or format, that the arts are included in part in school next year. So we're having discussions about how do we move our Imagine program, which usually puts about 13,500 children in arts experiences each year. How do we do that in a digital format through video, in classrooms or online? And how do we support arts organizations and teaching artists and offering that online? And I would love to give a shout out to Monica Kinsey and Dawn Oakes with Arts Forward for their Arts Academy, which is a platform that's local here to Chattanooga, where families can log on, and have arts experiences for young people from a variety of different costs, from free to paid, high quality arts experiences. So a lot of times when we go through challenges, again, like I said early on, we lean into the arts for our sanity, but then we also forget the arts. So we're going to make sure that we don't forget the arts, and that is part of school next year, no matter what school looks like.
Thank you, James. Right now, I'm going to go to Serena, one of the Southside Council board members, and she's going to ask you guys a few questions from the chat.
Hey, so I thought you asked some fantastic questions. The panelists had just phenomenal answers. I'm really excited to hear all of the answers that we have. We do have some questions from the audience. I'm just going to start from the top. This one's anonymous. And I'm going to direct this one to Dionne, because you did mention this earlier about the 20% gap and how most employers are allowing for that 20% gap. But when it comes to Black people and then people of color, they're not allowed the 20%. And somebody asked specifically about Latinos. And do you feel like with Latinos specifically, do they have to have 100% as well?
Absolutely. So when people
may have just, can you start that over? I think that we lost you for just a second.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So what I was saying is, when you talk about people of color, that's everyone that's non-white, basically. And so Latinos definitely fall into that gap. And yes, they are also required to have 100% of the qualifications, but I feel like they also have an added disadvantage because of the language barrier. And if there is an accent, if they have a thick accent and people find it difficult to understand them, that puts them at another disadvantage that employers often tend to look at and go, how would they fit in our culture? And how does that work? And that drives me nuts to hear people say that. But absolutely, they have that same lack of that stretch, that 20% stretch.
Thank you. Deb or James, did you want to chime in on that?
Well, I just, when we talk about this, it just reminds me of what a lot of us here as Black people or people of color growing up, and I know that Dionne and Darian can probably finish what I'm about to say, but we have always heard from our elders that we have to have we have to be twice as good to do what get half as much. And I think that the stat that you're talking about is exactly what they were talking about. Now, that was folk wisdom and knowledge, but it was based on something. And there's data, that's out there to back it up.
Absolutely.
Any more questions from the chat, Serena? Serena.
Sorry, guys. Okay, next question. Deb, did you want to weigh in on that? It's hard for nominally privileged persons to connect with opportunities. How can we make it possible for all persons, especially members of disadvantaged groups, to access opportunities for learning, development, and employment?
Be happy to start on that one. I feel like that's part of the work we're really doing right now in partnership with the Chamber. What are those opportunities? Really identifying pathways, connecting people to pathways, and providing whatever that gap might be. Maybe they need childcare, transportation, wage replacement in order to engage in training, right? What are the gaps that currently are in place that are making it difficult for that person to move into that next job? Is it a skills gap? Is it a training gap? Is it an opportunity gap? And it often is. What are those things we can do? And I think part of that is networking, and maybe James will talk a little bit about some of the ideas we had around that. But I think that the goal here is to figure out what's getting in the way and providing a little bit of support to get that, whatever that barrier is, out of the way, so that we are providing sort of that interim step, whether it be childcare or transportation, wage, all of those. The other piece that we've talked a lot about is expunging records. You know, somebody did something dumb at 18 and now they're 30 and they can't get a job. Well, let's do something about that, right? We can do something about these things, and because we can, we should.
Awesome, awesome. Serena, any more questions? Serena, any more questions from the chat? James, did you want to chime in on the last one, James?
Well, yeah. So a lot of times what we've also learned is that people don't have the social networks that kind of open up the information, which Dionne alluded to. They don't have people to vouch for them, advocate, bring up their names in conversations when people begin to have talk about openings and promotions and whatnot. So a project that Deb, Dionne, and all of us are part of, which is a local diversity and inclusion network and support group. We have been working on a yellow book, which is an idea where people who would be willing to mentor younger people really of all ages in the city who are looking for connections, access, information, could make themselves available in this yellow book and be like email mentors, meet people for coffee, discuss career options. But it's just something that we're working on, which I think we'll probably roll out in the next couple of months. But hopefully it will address some of those social networking and social access challenges that a lot of people face.
Good, good. I think we may have one more question from the Q&A section. I think Christy's gonna ask it. Christy, do we have a question from the Q&A?
Yeah, I actually have one here that, can you hear me okay? Since we were having some tech. Okay, cool. So just given obviously like the warranted mistrust between like kind of the communities, like, and this is speaking for myself too, but the question did not come from me, but how do we as like white leaders build relationships to kind of get introductions or introduce ourselves with leaders of colors in a way that we can ensure it is like an authentic way to build trust?
Who wants to tackle that?
What I do, but I would love to hear your perspective, James and Dionne. But I try to be present. I try to listen. I try to figure out where the gaps are in needs that I maybe can fill and try and be a part of that. I really work hard at being humble about what I know and what I don't know and being honest about that. And, you know, I read a really interesting article recently about getting comfortable with your discomfort. And I think as white leaders, we got to figure that out. It's okay to be uncomfortable. We don't know all the answers. We don't have that lived experience. We have to open ourselves up and learn and be a support system and be that reliable person who follows through and does what needs to be done in order to support change. So that's, you know, that's sort of my feeling about how I work toward making change in the community.
Thank you, Deb. Go ahead, Dionne. Go ahead.
I would echo everything that Deb said, because you do have to open yourself up and be receptive to the information, and making sure that when we're talking that you're listening to what we're actually saying and the why behind it. But one thing that I would say in terms of reaching out and finding Black leaders, there are so many of us that are here and we're all open and available to meet and talk. So extend an invite for coffee, or now in this virtual world, we can do a one-on-one Zoom and just talk about what your needs are, what exactly are you looking for. And I call myself, I'm a connector. That's what I do. I think that's my specialty. So if what you need, I don't have expertise in, I do know who you can talk to and I'll connect you to the right person. But it, you know, in my diversity training, when people ask, how do I talk to someone that's different from me? How do I open myself up? And I say, you start with hello. Everybody can receive that hello, right? It's really simple. I think we tend to overcomplicate it when we look at the word diversity, equity, and inclusion. We make it too complex. Send me a meeting invite, ask me to have coffee, we'll talk, and then we'll make sure that you get connected to the right person. So it's all about taking that first step.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we are at time. I want to thank you three again. Great panel discussion, you guys.
Thank you.
I want to thank the Southside Council. I want to thank Ross. I want to thank Eric, my colleagues, for helping present this presentation. And right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Christy Graves, President of the Southside Council. Christy, here you go.
I just want to say thank you. This was really informative. I took a lot of notes and just want to appreciate everybody. And this came out better than what I was expecting. And we want to help be connectors and continue the conversation. We'll be posting the recording to this in the, or both on the Chamber and the Southside Council Facebook group. Yeah, I hope you'll also join us in next month. We'll be doing another virtual event in a little bit different format in August, second Thursdays, and then also on the third Wednesdays, kind of a virtual coffee chat. And I loved what Dionne said about just keeping it simple, and we're hoping to help create a space just to say hello to people. So with that, yeah, just thank you again for everybody joining and being present, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks for having us.